The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the streets of Riverside into rivers of reflected neon and shadows. Marcus Webb stood beneath the flickering awning of Lou's Corner Bakery, watching the water cascade from the torn canvas above him. At 3 feet 9 inches tall, he'd learned to navigate a world built for people twice his size, but tonight the rain felt personal, as if even the sky had decided to make things harder. He clutched a white bakery box against his chest, protecting it from the downpour like it contained something precious, which it did. Inside was a small chocolate cake with pink frosting roses, the kind they sold at discount after 5 o'clock. He'd waited until his shift ended at the warehouse to buy it, counting out crumpled bills and loose change while the teenager behind the counter pretended not to notice his height, his worn jacket, the way his hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. Today was Emma's 6th birthday, and Marcus had promised her something special. The cake wasn't much, not compared to the elaborate princess parties other kids had, with bounce houses and magicians and tables loaded with presents wrapped in expensive paper. But it was what he could afford, and he'd learned years ago that love wasn't measured in dollars. At least that's what he told himself during the long nights when he lay awake doing math that never quite added up, wondering how he'd make it to the next paycheck. The number 42 bus pulled up with a hydraulic wheeze, spraying water from the gutter. Marcus climbed aboard, his short legs requiring an extra step that made him feel like a child climbing into something not meant for him. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, barely glanced his way. That was fine. Better than the alternative. The stares that lasted too long, the whispered comments people thought he couldn't hear, the way mothers would pull their children closer when he passed, as if his difference might somehow be contagious. He found a seat near the back, carefully setting the cake box on his lap. The bus was mostly empty at this hour, just a handful of other working people heading home after long shifts. A woman across the aisle met his eyes briefly, then looked away. A teenage boy with headphones glanced over, did a double take, then returned to his phone. Marcus had become an expert at reading these micro-expressions, the split-second judgments that flashed across people's faces before they remembered to be polite. The bus lurched forward, and Marcus watched the city slide past the rain-streaked windows. Riverside had once been a proud industrial town, back when the factories ran 3 shifts and everyone had work. Now it was a patchwork of closed storefronts and struggling families, neighborhoods where hope felt like a luxury no one could quite afford. Marcus had lived here his entire life, in the same apartment building where his mother had raised him alone, where he was now raising Emma alone. History repeating itself in ways that felt both familiar and cruel. His mother. Sarah Webb had been 4 feet 11 inches herself, not quite a dwarf by medical standards, but small enough to understand what it meant to be different. She'd raised Marcus with fierce love and fiercer determination, working 2 jobs to keep them fed and clothed, never once suggesting that his achondroplasia, the genetic condition that caused his short stature and distinctive features, was anything but another fact of life, like having brown eyes or being left-handed. She'd died 3 years ago, her heart simply stopping one Tuesday morning while she folded laundry in the cramped apartment. Emma had been 3 then, barely old enough to understand that Grandma wasn't coming back. Marcus had been 27, suddenly alone with a daughter and a grief so vast it felt like drowning on dry land. Emma's mother had left when Emma was just 6 months old, Vanessa. They'd met at a support group for people with genetic conditions. She had a mild form of scoliosis and understood, or so Marcus had thought, what it meant to be different. They'd bonded over shared experiences, fallen into something that felt like love, and when Vanessa got pregnant, Marcus had been terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. But parenthood had revealed fractures Marcus hadn't seen. Vanessa looked at Emma. Perfectly healthy, average height for her age, no signs of inheriting Marcus's condition, and saw a way out. She saw a daughter who wouldn't face the challenges Marcus had faced, who might escape the weight of being different. And she saw Marcus, small and struggling and working minimum wage, and realized she wanted a different life. She left on a Sunday. Marcus came home from picking up groceries to find half the apartment empty and a note on the kitchen table. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. Take care of her." 3 years later, that note still lived in a drawer Marcus never opened, a reminder that even people who should understand could decide you weren't worth the effort. The bus jerked to a stop at Pine and 7th, and Marcus gathered the cake box carefully. The walk home was 2 blocks through rain that had softened to a steady drizzle. His building rose up against the dark sky, 5 stories of faded yellow brick and narrow windows, the kind of place people lived when they had no better options. 3rd floor, apartment 3C, home. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the hallway when he reached his floor, her small frame wrapped in a floral cardigan despite the building's perpetual stuffiness. She was 78, a widow who'd lived in 3B for 40 years, and she'd appointed herself as Emma's unofficial grandmother after Sarah died. Marcus didn't know what he'd have done without her. Probably lost his job and his mind in equal measure, trying to figure out childcare on a warehouse worker's salary. "She's been counting down the hours since lunch," Mrs. Chen said, her accent softening the words. "Asked me 12 times when you'd be home." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Seriously. I don't know how to repay you for everything you do." She waved a wrinkled hand dismissively. "You pay me by being a good father. By showing that girl what real love looks like." Her eyes softened. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Marcus. I hope you know that." The words hit him harder than expected, and he had to blink back the sudden sting in his eyes. "I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. Trying is all any of us can do." She squeezed his shoulder. She was one of the few people who didn't have to bend down to do it, and shuffled back to her apartment. "Give Emma a kiss for me. Tell her happy birthday from Auntie Chen." Marcus unlocked his door and stepped into the familiar chaos of home. The apartment was small, a combined living room and kitchen, 1 bedroom he shared with Emma, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was theirs, and Mrs. Chen had clearly spent the afternoon making it festive. Paper streamers hung from the ceiling, and a hand-drawn banner declaring, "Happy Birthday, Emma," was taped crookedly above the couch. "Daddy!" Emma exploded from the bedroom, all flying brown curls and skinny arms. She wore the yellow dress he'd found at St. Vincent's thrift store last month, the one with tiny sunflowers that had made her gasp with delight. At 6, she was already taller than Marcus when he sat down, a fact that filled him with pride and a strange sort of sadness he couldn't quite name. She crashed into him, wrapping her arms around his neck and nearly knocking the cake box from his hands. Marcus laughed, genuine and full, the sound surprising even himself. Emma had this effect. She could make him forget, for precious moments, all the weight he carried. "Easy, baby girl. You're gonna turn Daddy into a pancake. But I missed you." She pulled back, her face, Sarah's face, Vanessa's eyes, but her own unique combination of both, bright with excitement. "Is that what I think it is?" "Well, I don't know. What do you think it is?" "Cake." She bounced on her toes. "You got me a cake. Can we eat it now? Can we? First, how about you wash those hands? Then we'll light some candles and make this official." She raced to the bathroom, and Marcus took a moment to breathe. His back ached. It always did after a 12-hour shift of lifting boxes and moving inventory. His feet hurt. His shoulders hurt. At 30, he sometimes felt 60, his body protesting the demands he placed on it daily. But when Emma came running back, hands still damp and leaving spots on her dress, when he set the cake on their tiny kitchen table and lit 6 pink candles while she stared at them like they held magic, the pain receded to wherever it lived when he wasn't paying attention. They sang Happy Birthday together, just the 2 of them in their cramped apartment where the refrigerator hummed too loud and the radiator clanked and the upstairs neighbors fought loudly enough to hear. Emma closed her eyes tight, her face scrunched with concentration as she made her wish. In the candlelight, Marcus saw his mother's nose, Vanessa's cheekbones, his own stubborn chin. "What did you wish for?" he asked, knowing she wouldn't tell him. But she did. She looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes and said, "I wish that people would stop being mean to you, Daddy, that they'd see how good you are." The candle lighter felt heavy in Marcus's hand. Around them, the apartment suddenly felt smaller, quieter. "People aren't mean to me, sweetheart." "Yes, they are." Her voice carried the matter-of-fact certainty of children who haven't learned to soften hard truths yet. At school, I heard Sophie's mom tell another mom that you were—" She paused, struggling with the word. "A midget, and that it was sad I had to have a dad like that." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Emma, and Tommy asked me if I was going to be little like you, and when I said no, he said I was lucky." Her eyes started to shine with tears. "But I don't feel lucky, Daddy. I feel mad, because you're the best daddy in the whole world, and they don't even know you." He pulled her into his lap, holding her against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong despite everything. "Listen to me. Those people, the ones who say mean things, they don't matter. What matters is this." He tapped her chest, right over her heart. "What you know to be true in here. And you know I love you more than anything in this world, right?" "Right," she whispered. "And you know that being different doesn't mean being less, right?" "Right. Then that's all that matters." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "People who judge by height or looks or money, they're the ones who are small, Emma. Not me. Never me. Because I have you and you make me feel 10 feet tall." She giggled through her tears. "That's really tall." "Exactly." He wiped her cheeks with his thumbs. "Now, how about we eat some of this cake before it decides to eat itself?" They ate with plastic forks that bent under the weight of frosting. Emma got chocolate on her nose, her cheeks, somehow in her hair. She talked about school, about her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who was nice and let Emma help water the plants, about the book she was reading about a girl who could talk to animals, about how she wanted a dog even though Marcus had explained 100 times that their landlord didn't allow pets. For those moments, cutting cake and listening to his daughter chatter about her small, bright world, Marcus could almost forget the stack of bills on the counter, the overdue rent notice he'd shoved in a drawer, the way his manager at the warehouse had mentioned that hours might get cut after the holidays. Almost. Later, after Emma had brushed her teeth and changed into her pajamas, hand-me-downs from Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, worn soft and thin, Marcus tucked her into the bed they shared. The bedroom was barely big enough for the full-size mattress and a small dresser, their clothes mixed together because there was nowhere else to put them. He read to her from their library book, a story about a mouse who went on adventures, and Emma's eyes grew heavy. She fought sleep like she always did, afraid of missing something, but eventually her breathing evened out and her hand relaxed in his. Marcus sat there in the dark, watching her sleep, and felt the weight of everything he was trying to hold up pressed down on him. The bills, the job that was slowly destroying his body, the constant awareness that Emma was growing up in poverty, that other kids had things she could only dream about, that her father's difference marked her as different too. He pulled out his phone, a cracked screen iPhone 6 that he'd bought used 3 years ago, and opened his email. The subject line he'd been both hoping for and dreading was there, bold in his inbox. Henderson Electronics Employment Application Status Update. Marcus's heart hammered. 3 months ago, he'd applied for a position in their warehouse management department. Day shifts, benefits. A salary that would mean Emma could have new clothes instead of thrift store finds, that they could move to a better neighborhood with better schools, that Marcus could maybe, finally, take a full breath without worrying about money. The interview had gone well, he'd thought. The hiring manager, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to his neighbor, had seemed impressed by his inventory systems experience, his work ethic, his ideas for improving efficiency. She'd barely blinked at his height, had even asked thoughtful questions about whether the workplace was accessible, what accommodations he might need. But Marcus had learned, through years of disappointments, that interviews could be deceptive. People could smile to your face and then decide you were too much of a risk, too much trouble, too likely to need special consideration. His finger hovered over the email. Part of him wanted to delete it unread, to preserve the hope for a little longer. But that was cowardice, and if there was one thing Marcus Webb was not, it was a coward. He opened it. Dear Mr. Webb, thank you for your interest in Henderson Electronics and for taking the time to interview for the warehouse operations manager position. After careful consideration of all candidates, we have decided to move forward with applicants whose qualifications more closely align with our current organizational needs. We encourage you to apply for future positions that match your experience and wish you the best in your job search. Sincerely, Human Resources Department, Henderson Electronics. Marcus read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something different, but they stayed the same. Polite, professional, meaningless. Qualifications more closely align with our current organizational needs. Translation: we don't want to take a chance on someone different. He closed his laptop and put his head in his hands. He didn't cry. He'd used up most of his tears in the months after his mother died, when he'd lie awake wondering how he was possibly going to raise a daughter alone, wondering if he was enough. But the disappointment sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. Another door closed, another hope extinguished. Another reminder that no matter how hard he worked, how qualified he was, how desperately he needed a break, the world had already decided what someone like him was worth. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor at the warehouse. "Need you Saturday. Mandatory overtime," Johnson called out. Saturday was supposed to be their day. The one full day Marcus had with Emma where they could go to the park, to the library, maybe get dollar menu hamburgers at McDonald's and pretend it was a fancy restaurant. It was the day that made all the other days bearable. But what choice did he have? Bills didn't pay themselves. Rent didn't forgive lateness. Emma needed food and clothes and shoes that fit, and 1,000 other things that cost money he didn't have. He typed back, "I'll be there." Then he set his phone on the nightstand, lay down beside his sleeping daughter, and stared at the ceiling where a water stain had formed the shape of something that might have been a bird or might have been nothing at all. "I'm trying," he whispered to no one. "God, I'm trying so hard." The ceiling didn't answer. It never did. The weeks that followed had the quality of a slow slide toward some invisible edge Marcus couldn't quite see but could feel approaching. The car, a 1997 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles and a tendency to stall at red lights, broke down on a Tuesday morning. The mechanic, a guy named Raul who ran a shop 2 blocks from the warehouse, gave Marcus a sympathetic look when he explained the problem. "It's the transmission, man. I can patch it, but it's going to cost you $1,500 minimum. And even then, it's only buying you time. This car's on borrowed life. $1,500. Marcus had $200 in his checking account and about $30 in his wallet. "How much to patch it?" $400. "But Marcus, I'm telling you, it's not going to last." $400, Marcus repeated. "Can you give me until Friday?" Raul sighed. "Yeah, man, I got you. But you got to figure something out long term, you know." Marcus knew. He knew a lot of things that didn't help him fix them. He took the bus to work for the next 3 days, adding an extra hour to his commute each way. It meant leaving Emma with Mrs. Chen even earlier, getting home even later, existing in a constant state of exhaustion that made his bones feel like they were made of lead. On Thursday, Emma came home from school with a drawing. She'd made it in art class, a picture of their family, just the two of them, holding hands under a smiling sun. She'd drawn Marcus small and herself taller, but they were holding hands, and their smiles were big, and above them she'd written in careful, crooked letters, "My dad is my hero." Marcus taped it to the refrigerator with shaking hands and had to excuse himself to the bathroom where he pressed his face into a towel and cried as quietly as he could. Friday brought a notice from the landlord. Rent was due in 3 days, and they were already 2 weeks late from last month. Another notice from the hospital about Emma's checkup, informing him that his insurance had been denied for some reason and he owed $700. A text from his brother Jeremy in California, asking if Marcus could lend him $300. Jeremy. Marcus hadn't spoken to him in 8 months. His older brother, 6 feet tall and handsome and normal, who'd escaped Riverside years ago and built a life of his own somewhere sunny and expensive. Jeremy, who'd told Marcus at their mother's funeral that maybe Emma would be better off with a real family who could provide properly for her. Marcus deleted the text without responding. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of day where the sun never quite manages to break through the clouds. Marcus made Emma pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, her favorite, and watched her eat them while he sipped instant coffee that tasted like regret. "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" His heart cracked a little. "I have to work today, baby, remember?" Her face fell. "But you always work. You promised we'd have a Saturday together." "I know, and I'm sorry. But we need the money and—" "We always need money." Her voice rose, tears starting. "I don't want money, I want you. I want my daddy." She was 6. She didn't understand about rent and bills and keeping the lights on. She only understood that her father was never there, that she spent more time with Mrs. Chen than with him, that other kids had 2 parents and toys and birthday parties while she had one tired dad and a refrigerator drawing. "Emma, listen." "No." She pushed away from the table, her chair scraping loud against the linoleum. "You always say tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. You don't love me anymore." "That's not true." "Then why are you never here?" She was crying now, full-on sobbing, and Marcus felt his own composure shattering. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why Mommy left and Grandma died and you're always gone?" Marcus moved to hold her, but she pulled away and ran to the bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. He stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the remains of breakfast, and felt more defeated than he'd ever felt in his life. This was the cost nobody talked about. Not the money or the long hours or the physical pain. The real cost was his daughter learning to feel abandoned. Learning that love came with conditions and absences. Learning to doubt that she mattered. He knocked on the bedroom door. "Emma, baby, please let me in." Silence. "I'm not leaving for work until we talk." "I don't care if I'm late." More silence, then a small voice. "Promise?" "I promise." The door opened slowly. Emma stood there with red eyes and tear-stained cheeks, looking smaller than 6, looking like every fear Marcus carried made visible. He sat down on the floor so they were the same height. "You're right. I work too much, and I'm not here enough, and I'm sorry for that, Emma. I'm so sorry." "Then why do you do it?" "Because I'm trying to give you a life. A good life. Better than what I had." He reached out and touched her hand. "But you're also right that money isn't the same as time. And I've been so focused on keeping us afloat that I forgot we need to actually live, not just survive." "I don't care if we're poor," Emma whispered. "I just want you. I know, and you have me. Always, no matter what." He pulled her into his lap. "Tell you what, I'll call in sick today. We'll go to the park, just like I promised. We'll feed the ducks and play on the swings and get ice cream even though it's cold outside." "Really?" "Really. Some things are more important than money. You're teaching me that." She hugged him tight, and Marcus called his supervisor and lied about being sick, and they spent the day at Riverside Park feeding stale bread to ducks and pushing each other on swings and eating ice cream that cost too much and was absolutely worth it. That night, Emma fell asleep with her head in his lap while they watched a movie on their small TV, and Marcus stroked her hair and thought about how close he'd come to losing something more valuable than any job. He was still thinking about it when Emma started coughing. At first it seemed minor, just a small dry cough that could have been anything. Kids got sick all the time, but by Tuesday the cough had gotten worse, rattling in her chest like something loose. By Wednesday, she had a fever. By Thursday morning, Marcus woke to find Emma struggling to breathe, her lips tinged blue, her small body burning hot. The emergency room was 12 blocks away, and the Civic was still in the shop. Marcus carried Emma the whole way, her head lolling against his shoulder, his arms screaming with effort because she was getting so big and he was so small. People stared as he staggered past, a dwarf carrying a child who looked too large for him, but Marcus didn't care about stairs anymore. He only cared about getting her help. The ER waiting room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Marcus gave information to a tired receptionist behind plexiglass, filled out forms with shaking hands, and then waited. 20 minutes, 40, an hour. Emma whimpered against him, and each small sound felt like a knife. Finally, a nurse called them back. They took Emma's temperature, 103.7, and her oxygen levels, 88%, and suddenly everything accelerated. Doctors appeared. Emma was whisked away to a room. Words like pneumonia and respiratory distress and admission floated through air that felt too thick to breathe. "Is she going to be okay?" Marcus asked a doctor who looked barely old enough to have finished medical school. "We're giving her oxygen and starting her on IV antibiotics. She's stable for now, but she needs to stay here for monitoring. Do you have insurance?" "Yes, through the state, Medicaid." The doctor nodded. "Good. The social worker will come talk to you about that. Right now, focus on your daughter." Emma was admitted to a room on the pediatric floor, surrounded by beeping machines and tubes that looked too large for her small arms. Marcus sat beside her bed and held her hand and prayed to a God he wasn't sure listened anymore. "Daddy?" Her voice was small and scratchy. "I'm here, baby." "Am I going to die like Grandma?" The question hit him like a physical blow. No, you're going to be fine. The medicine is going to make you better. Promise? I promise. Please let me be able to keep this promise, he thought. Please. She fell asleep, and Marcus sat vigil in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting each breath like a prayer. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, speaking in gentle voices. Night turned to day, then to night again. Marcus didn't leave except to use the bathroom. Mrs. Chen brought him food he barely touched. The hospital became its own strange world, a place where time moved differently, and the only thing that mattered was the sound of his daughter breathing. On the second day, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that held both kindness and something that looked like recognition. She wore a badge that identified her as Dr. Patricia Morrison, Social Services. "Mr. Webb, do you have a moment to talk?" Marcus glanced at Emma, who was sleeping. "If it's about the bill." "It's not." "Not exactly." She pulled a chair beside him, and Marcus noticed that she didn't sit up straight. She slouched a bit so they were more level, a gesture so small and so thoughtful it nearly undid him. "I wanted to introduce myself and let you know I'm here to help with anything you need. Parking validation, meal vouchers, help navigating insurance. That's my job." "Thank you." "I've been reviewing Emma's chart and I noticed something." She paused. "Your address, Riverside Apartments on Pine Street. I grew up 3 blocks from there." Marcus looked at her more carefully. "Really?" "Really. Moved away 20 years ago, but I remember what it was like. Working-class neighborhood, good people trying to make ends meet." She smiled. "My mom cleaned houses. My dad worked construction until his back gave out. I know what it means to count pennies and pray you make it to the next paycheck. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know I see you, Marcus. And I see what you're doing for your daughter." Her voice softened. "I've worked in pediatrics for 15 years. I've seen every kind of parent there is. Rich ones who barely visit, married couples who spend the whole time blaming each other, single parents stretched so thin they're transparent." She paused. "But I've rarely seen a father more devoted than you. Emma talks about you constantly when she's awake, about how you make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, about how you read to her every night even when you're exhausted, about how you told her that being small doesn't mean being less." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "She also told me something else. She said that the other night, when you were watching her sleep, you said if God forgot about you, you'd remember enough for both of you." "Doctor." Morrison's eyes were bright. "That's not the statement of someone who's been forgotten, Marcus. That's the statement of someone who embodies exactly what God is supposed to be: love, protection, sacrifice, showing up day after day no matter what. I'm just trying to be your father. And you're succeeding. Better than you probably realize." She pulled out a folder. "I want to help make sure that success continues. There's a foundation I work with closely, the Riverside Children's Medical Fund. They help families in situations like yours, covering medical costs that insurance won't. I'd like to submit an application on Emma's behalf if you'll allow it." Pride and desperation warred inside Marcus. He'd spent his whole life trying not to be a charity case, trying not to be the person people pitied. But he looked through the window at his daughter, at the tubes and machines keeping her stable, and realized that his pride mattered less than her health. "What do I need to do?" "Just sign some forms. The rest is on me." She handed him paperwork. "Marcus, accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And Emma deserves every chance to get better without her father drowning in medical debt." He signed with hands that shook. "Thank you. I don't know how to." "You don't need to thank me. You just need to keep being the father Emma already thinks you are. That's more than enough." She stood. "Emma's going to be fine, by the way. The antibiotics are working. She'll probably be able to go home in a few days." After Dr. Morrison left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts and his sleeping daughter. Through the window, Riverside sprawled in the distance, all cramped buildings and narrow streets, the place that had held his whole life. He'd spent so long resenting it, wanting to escape it, seeing it as a trap. But Dr. Morrison had grown up there too, and had become a doctor, someone who helped people. Mrs. Chen had lived there for 40 years and had become a grandmother to Emma. Even in poverty, even in struggle, there was goodness. There were people who saw past surfaces to the desperate love underneath. Maybe, Marcus thought, the problem wasn't Riverside. Maybe it was his own inability to see that being different, being small, being poor didn't mean being forgotten. It meant being part of a community that understood struggle because they lived it too. Emma stirred, her eyes opening. "Daddy?" "Right here, baby. I had a dream about Grandma," she said. Emma's voice was scratchy but clearer than it had been. "She said God doesn't forget anyone. He just works through people instead of miracles." Marcus felt tears slide down his face. "That sounds like something Grandma would say. Am I going to be okay?" "Yes, you're going to be fine. And when we get home, things are going to be different. Better. I promise." "Different how?" "I'm going to be there more, work less, make more dinosaur pancakes and take more park days. Because you're right, you matter more than money." He kissed her forehead. "You're the only thing that matters." Emma smiled and fell back asleep, and Marcus sat beside her and felt something inside him shift. Not his circumstances. Those were still hard, still challenging, still full of obstacles. But his understanding of what it meant to be forgotten. He wasn't forgotten. Emma wasn't forgotten. They were seen by Mrs. Chen and Dr. Morrison and Raoul the mechanic and the nurses who spoke gently, and the woman at the grocery store who sometimes slipped Emma a free cookie. They were part of a web of people who struggled together, who helped each other, who proved that love wasn't about grand gestures but about showing up. Emma came home 4 days later, weak but smiling, clutching a stuffed elephant one of the nurses had given her. The apartment had been cleaned, Mrs. Chen's work, and there was a card on the table signed by neighbors Marcus barely knew. "Welcome home, Emma. Get well soon." That evening, someone knocked on the door. Marcus opened it to find a woman he didn't recognize, maybe 45, with graying brown hair and eyes that held both sorrow and strength. "Mr. Webb, my name is Catherine Hartley. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Riverside Elementary. I don't teach Emma, but I've seen you both at school functions, and I heard she was sick." She held out a manila envelope. "May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside, confused but curious. Catherine sat carefully on their worn couch, looking around the small apartment without judgment. "I'm going to tell you something I don't share often," she said. 23 years ago I had a son, Daniel. He had Down syndrome, and raising him alone was the hardest thing I've ever done." Her voice caught. People stared. Other parents didn't want their kids playing with him. "I fought the school district for every service, every accommodation. I worked 3 jobs. I was exhausted and angry and scared every single day." She paused, and Marcus saw grief flicker across her face. "Daniel died when he was 11. Heart complications. And for a long time after, I was so bitter I couldn't function. I kept thinking about all the people who'd made our lives harder just because he was different, all the cruelty disguised as concern or discomfort." "I'm so sorry," Marcus said quietly. "Thank you. But I'm telling you this because watching you and Emma these past 2 years, seeing you at school events in the park. It reminds me why I survived Daniel's loss, why I became a teacher, why I still believe in goodness even after seeing so much ugliness." She handed him the envelope. "After Daniel died, I started a scholarship fund in his name. It's for children whose parents work twice as hard for half the recognition, who face the world with courage despite everything stacked against them. I'd like Emma to be this year's recipient." Marcus opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter explaining the scholarship and a check. The amount, $5,000, made his vision blur. This is too much," he whispered. "It's exactly enough. It's for school supplies, clothes, maybe a savings account for her future." "It's meant to give you breathing room, Marcus. Room to be Emma's father instead of just her provider." Catherine reached out and touched his hand. "Daniel used to ask me the same question Emma asked you. Did God forget about us, Mommy?" And I told him what I'll tell you now. God doesn't forget. He just works through people instead of miracles. Through teachers who care, neighbors who help, strangers who see your struggle and decide to ease it. After Catherine left, Marcus sat holding the check and crying harder than he'd cried since his mother died. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, of having someone look at his life and recognize not the struggle, but the love powering it. Emma padded out of the bedroom, still moving slowly. "Why are you crying, Daddy?" "Because sometimes," he said, pulling her gently into his lap, careful of her still healing lungs, "good things happen. And we're allowed to be grateful for them. We're allowed to feel happy." "What good thing happened?" He showed her the letter explaining in simple terms that a kind woman wanted to help them, that they'd have money for new shoes and school supplies, that maybe they could even get a new winter coat for her instead of the one from the thrift store with the broken zipper. Emma's eyes grew wide. "Why would she do that? She doesn't even know us." "Because she knows what it's like to struggle. And because seeing people help each other is how we remember that the world isn't as dark as it sometimes seems." He kissed her forehead. "And because you, Emma Webb, are worth helping, worth loving, worth everything." She nestled against him, and they sat there in the fading afternoon light, two people who'd been through more than most but were still standing, still fighting, still believing that tomorrow might be better than today. The months that followed weren't perfect. There were still hard days, still moments when Marcus felt the crushing weight of single parenthood and poverty and being different. But there were also shifts, small tectonic movements in the foundation of their lives that accumulated into something larger. The scholarship money from Catherine's fund meant Emma could start the new semester with supplies that weren't borrowed or secondhand. She had a backpack that didn't have holes, notebooks with clean pages, and shoes that actually fit. The difference it made wasn't just practical, it was emotional. Emma walked taller, smiled more readily, stopped apologizing for things she had no control over. Dr. Morrison stayed in touch, checking in every few weeks to see how Emma was recovering. She connected Marcus with resources he hadn't known existed, a program that helped with utility bills during winter months, a food pantry at a local church that provided fresh produce and meat, a free after-school program where Emma could get help with homework and play with other kids while Marcus worked. More than that, she became something Marcus hadn't expected, a friend. Someone who understood the particular exhaustion of fighting systems not designed for people like him, who listened without judgment when he needed to vent about the daily microaggressions and challenges. "You know what the hardest part is?" Marcus told her one afternoon over coffee in the hospital cafeteria during one of Emma's follow-up appointments. "It's not the stares or even the outright discrimination. It's the constant awareness that I have to be twice as good to be seen as half as capable. That one mistake, one moment of being human, and people will say, 'See, I knew he couldn't handle it.'" Dr. Morrison nodded. "The burden of representation, having to be perfect because you're standing in for everyone who's different." "Exactly." Marcus stirred his coffee, watching the liquid swirl. "Sometimes I'm just tired of being brave, being strong, being the example. Sometimes I want to fall apart and have someone else hold it together for a while. Then fall apart," she said simply. "Here, now. With someone who understands that falling apart doesn't mean failure. It means you're human. And so he did. He talked about the rejection from Henderson Electronics and the dozens of jobs before it. About Vanessa leaving and feeling like he hadn't been enough. About his mother dying and the terror of suddenly being alone with a 3-year-old. About the nights he'd lie awake doing math that never added up, wondering how he'd make it another month, another week, another day. Dr. Morrison listened to all of it, and when he was done, she said, "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. And I don't mean that as a platitude, I mean it literally. What you do every single day, show up for Emma, work a job that's destroying your body, fight a world that's determined to underestimate you, that takes a kind of strength most people never have to develop. So yes, fall apart when you need to, and then get back up. Because that's what strong people do." Catherine Hartley became another unexpected presence in their lives. She stopped by once a month, always with some excuse. She was in the neighborhood, she had extra books from her classroom, she wanted to check on Emma's progress. But Marcus understood what she was really doing, staying connected to the memory of her son by helping a child who reminded her that love mattered more than loss. She and Emma bonded over books. Catherine would bring stacks from her personal library, and Emma would devour them, reading under her blanket with a flashlight after Marcus thought she was asleep. They talked about stories and characters, and Catherine encouraged Emma's natural curiosity, her questions about why characters made certain choices, what she would do differently. "She's bright," Catherine told Marcus one evening. "Really bright. Have you thought about gifted programs?" Marcus laughed, but it came out bitter. Gifted programs are for kids whose parents can afford tutors and enrichment activities. Kids like Emma just try to keep up. That's not true. There are scholarships, programs specifically for kids from low-income families. Let me look into it. She met his eyes. "Marcus, being poor doesn't mean accepting less for your child. It means fighting harder to get her what she deserves." And she did look into it. A month later, Emma was accepted into a weekend enrichment program at the community college, fully funded, where she could take classes in science and art and creative writing. Watching her light up as she talked about mixing chemicals that changed colors or writing stories about dragons made Marcus's chest ache with pride and gratitude. Mrs. Chen remained their constant, their rock. She watched Emma when Marcus worked late, fed her dinner when Marcus couldn't afford groceries until payday, told her stories about growing up in Taiwan and immigrating to America with nothing but hope and determination. "You and Emma, you remind me of my husband and me when we first came here," Mrs. Chen told Marcus one evening. "Everyone said we'd fail, that we were too foreign, too different, too poor. But we built a life anyway. Because love makes you stubborn." "Love makes you stubborn," Marcus repeated, smiling. "I like that. It's true. You love that girl so much you refuse to give up even when giving up would be easier. That's not weakness, Marcus. That's everything." The support network that had formed around them, Dr. Morrison, Catherine, Mrs. Chen, even Raoul the mechanic who'd fixed the Civic for half price, became a web of care that held them up when Marcus couldn't hold them up alone. But the most significant change came from somewhere Marcus hadn't expected, Emma herself. She started standing up to kids who made fun of their family. When Tommy called Marcus a midget on the playground, Emma got in his face, all 4 feet of 6-year-old fury, and told him that her daddy was more of a man than Tommy would ever be. She got sent to the principal's office for using aggressive language, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to be upset. "I know I'm not supposed to fight," Emma said that evening, looking worried, "but he was being mean about you, and I got so mad, Daddy. I understand why you were angry, and I'm proud of you for defending our family." Marcus pulled her close. "But here's the thing, baby. People like Tommy, they say mean things because they don't know any better, and getting angry at them just makes them think they're right to be mean. You know what really changes minds?" "What?" "Being so good, so kind, so obviously happy that they can't help but wonder if maybe they were wrong about us." He tapped her nose. "You don't have to fight my battles, Emma. You just have to live your life so fully, so joyfully, that people see there's nothing wrong with being different." She thought about this, then said, "But what if they never see it? Then that's their loss, not ours. We know who we are. We know we love each other." And that's enough. As winter melted into spring, Marcus noticed other changes too. Emma was growing more confident, more willing to try new things. She joined the after-school art club and brought home paintings that Marcus hung on every available wall. She made friends, real friends, kids who came over to play and never mentioned Marcus's height or their small apartment, or the fact that Emma's clothes came from thrift stores. One of those friends was a girl named Lily, whose father, Robert, was Mrs. Chen's son. Robert taught high school English and had a gentle manner that reminded Marcus of his own mother. Lily had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair, and she and Emma bonded over being kids whose families were different. Robert stopped by one Saturday morning, ostensibly to pick up Lily after a sleepover, but Marcus sensed he wanted to talk. "I wanted to thank you," Robert said, accepting a cup of coffee. "For what?" "For existing. For being visible." Robert glanced toward the bedroom where the girls were giggling over something. "Lily's been scared of being different her whole life. She doesn't want to use her wheelchair at school because kids stare. She gets embarrassed when I have to help her with things. But watching Emma talk about you, about how proud she is of her dad, about how you taught her that different doesn't mean less, it's changing how Lily sees herself." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I'm not doing anything special, just trying to raise my kid." "That's exactly what makes it special. You're not trying to be inspirational. You're just being a good father. And somehow that's more powerful than any motivational speech." Robert smiled. "My mom talks about you constantly, you know. Says you're the best thing to happen to this building in years. Says you remind her why she stayed in Riverside when she could have moved to be closer to me. Mrs. Chen has done more for us than I could ever repay. She doesn't want repayment. She wants community. She wants to know that helping each other still means something." Robert set down his coffee cup. "Listen, I'm part of a parent support group for families with kids who have disabilities or special needs. It's just a few of us who get together once a month to talk, share resources, remind each other we're not alone. Would you be interested in joining?" Marcus hesitated. He'd never thought of himself as part of that community, never quite identified as disabled, despite his dwarfism technically qualifying. But the idea of connecting with other parents who understood the specific challenges he faced was appealing. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'd like that." The support group met at the community center on the last Tuesday of each month. There were 8 regular members: Robert and his wife Sarah with Lily, a single mom named Jennifer whose son had autism, a couple named Mike and Patricia whose daughter had Down syndrome, a father named Carlos whose son was blind, and now Marcus and Emma. The first meeting Marcus attended, he mostly listened, heard stories that mirrored his own, the fights with school districts, the medical bills, the exhaustion, the constant advocacy required just to get their kids what they needed. But he also heard something else: resilience, joy, parents who'd found ways to celebrate their children's differences instead of mourning them. When Diego was first diagnosed, Carlos said, talking about his blind son, "I went through this period of grief, grieving the son I thought I'd have, the experiences I thought we'd share. But then one day Diego was about 4. He heard a bird singing and he got so excited. He made me stop and just listen for like 10 minutes. And I realized he was experiencing the world in a way I never had, noticing things I'd walk right past. And I thought, maybe his difference isn't something to grieve. Maybe it's something to learn from." The group talked about practical things too: what agencies offered the best services, how to navigate insurance, which doctors were most understanding. But mostly, they talked about love. About the fierce, protective, all-consuming love that came with raising kids the world wasn't quite ready for. "You know what no one tells you?" Jennifer said, her voice thick with emotion. "That you'll become an expert on your kid. That you'll learn about conditions and therapies and rights that you never wanted to know about. That you'll become a warrior without ever wanting to be one. But also, that your capacity for love will expand until you think your heart might actually explode." Marcus found himself nodding along, feeling seen in a way he rarely did. These people understood. They knew what it was like to love a child so much it hurt, to fight battles that shouldn't need fighting, to carry hope and fear in equal measure. After the meeting, Patricia, the mother with the daughter who had Down syndrome, approached him. "I'm glad you came. Robert's told us about you. All good things, I hope. The best things. About how devoted you are to Emma, how hard you work, how you're doing it all alone." She paused. "My husband and I, we have each other, and there are still days we barely manage. I can't imagine doing this alone." "You do what you have to do," Marcus said, the phrase he'd repeated so often it had become automatic. "But you shouldn't have to just survive, Marcus. You should get to thrive too. You should get to rest sometimes, to have help, to not carry everything alone." She pulled out a card. "This is the contact for a respite care program. Trained caregivers who can watch Emma for a few hours so you can just breathe. It's free for families who qualify. I think you should call them." Marcus took the card, knowing he probably wouldn't call, knowing he didn't trust anyone else with Emma, knowing asking for help felt like admitting defeat. But Patricia seemed to read his mind. Accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And Emma needs a father who's whole, not just one who's present. Think about it. That night Marcus did think about it, about how tired he was, not just physically but deep in his bones, about how he couldn't remember the last time he'd done something just for himself, about how Emma was growing up watching him sacrifice everything and might learn that love meant erasure of self. He called the respite care program the next morning. 2 weeks later, a woman named Angela came to the apartment for an initial meeting. She was in her 50s, warm and professional, with decades of experience caring for children with special needs and complex family situations. "I want to be clear," Marcus told her as they sat at the kitchen table while Emma played in the bedroom. "Emma doesn't have special needs. She's perfectly healthy. It's me who's different. Different is just different, Mr. Webb. Not better or worse." Angela smiled. "And every family is complex in its own way. From what I understand, you're a single father working long hours while raising a bright, beautiful daughter. That qualifies for respite services in my book." They arranged for Angela to watch Emma 2 Saturday afternoons a month, just 4 hours each time, but it felt like a lifetime to Marcus. The first Saturday, he didn't know what to do with himself. He'd planned to catch up on laundry, run errands, do all the things he never had time for. Instead, he went to Riverside Park alone and sat on a bench and just breathed. Watched people walk by, listened to birds, felt the sun on his face. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't Marcus the father, or Marcus the warehouse worker, or Marcus the dwarf. He was just Marcus, just himself. When he picked up Emma that afternoon, she was happy and chattering about the game she and Angela had played. No trauma from his absence, no fear he wouldn't come back. Just a well-adjusted kid who'd had fun with a nice caregiver. "Did you have a good time, Daddy?" she asked as they walked home. "I did. I sat in the park and thought about how lucky I am to have you." "That's boring. You should have gone on an adventure." Marcus laughed. Sometimes sitting still is an adventure when you're always moving. As spring turned to summer, Marcus felt something shifting inside him. Not his circumstances. He was still poor, still working too many hours, still navigating a world not built for him. But his relationship to those circumstances changed. He started seeing his life not as a series of obstacles to overcome, but as a story of resilience being written one day at a time. Emma finished first grade with good grades and a glowing report from her teacher. Mrs. Chen threw her a small party, inviting neighbors who'd become friends. Catherine brought books. Robert and Sarah brought board games. Dr. Morrison sent a card with a gift certificate to the bookstore. "Look at all these people who love you," Marcus told Emma as they cleaned up after everyone left. "Look at this community we have." "Is this because we stopped being forgotten?" Emma asked. "We were never forgotten, baby. We just didn't know who was remembering us." He pulled her close. "But now we know, and knowing changes everything." That summer, Marcus made a decision that terrified him. He was going to take Emma on a real vacation. Nothing elaborate, just a weekend at the beach, 2 hours away, staying in a cheap motel and eating sandwiches instead of restaurants. but it would be theirs, an experience they chose instead of one forced on them by circumstances. He saved for 3 months, putting aside $5 or $10 whenever he could. Mrs. Chen contributed $20 with a note that said, "For ice cream." Catherine added 50 with instructions to make memories. Dr. Morrison sent 100 with a card that simply said, "You deserve this." The weekend they went, the weather was perfect, sunny and warm with a breeze that smelled like salt and possibility. Emma had never seen the ocean before, and when they crested the dunes and she saw the vast expanse of water stretching to the horizon, she gasped. "It's so big," she whispered. "It goes on forever." "Pretty amazing, right? Can we go in?" They spent the day in the water, Emma shrieking with delight when waves knocked her down, Marcus helping her stand and then getting knocked down himself. They built sand castles that the tide destroyed. They found shells and sea glass. They ate sandy sandwiches and drank warm lemonade and laughed until their stomachs hurt. That evening, after Emma was asleep in the motel room, Marcus stood on the small balcony and looked at the ocean. Somewhere in the darkness, waves crashed against the shore, eternal and indifferent. And Marcus felt, for the first time since his mother died, something like peace. He wasn't rich. He wasn't conventionally successful. He would probably always be underestimated and stared at and judged. But he had Emma, and she was healthy and happy and growing up knowing she was loved. He had a community of people who'd decided to care about them. He had this moment, this breath, this life. "Thank you," he whispered to no one and everyone. To his mother, to God, to the universe, to the strangers who'd become friends. "Thank you for not forgetting us. And thank you for teaching us how to remember each other." The ocean didn't answer, but in the rhythm of the waves, Marcus heard something that sounded like agreement. The following school year brought new challenges and new growth. Emma started 2nd grade in a class with a teacher who immediately recognized her potential and pushed her to excel. She joined the school's reading club and the art program. She made more friends, kids whose parents didn't seem to care that Emma's dad was different or that they lived in a small apartment. Marcus got promoted at the warehouse, not to the management position he'd dreamed of, but to a team leader role that meant slightly better pay and mostly day shifts. It meant he could have breakfast with Emma every morning, could help with homework every evening, could be present in ways he hadn't been able to before. On Emma's 8th birthday, Marcus threw her a real party. Not elaborate, but real, at the park, with invitations and a cake from an actual bakery and games and decorations. 20 kids came, filling the pavilion with noise and chaos and joy. Marcus watched from the picnic table, content to let Emma have her day without him being the center of attention. But then Emma ran over, pulling at his hand. "Come on, Daddy. We're playing freeze tag and we need one more person." "Baby, I don't think, please. You're the birthday wish I made, remember? I wished you'd play with us." So Marcus played freeze tag with a dozen 8-year-olds, running and laughing and feeling ridiculous and happy and more alive than he'd felt in years. And not one kid commented on his height. Not one parent looked uncomfortable. They just smiled and took pictures and watched their children play with his. Later, Catherine found him sitting on a bench, catching his breath. "You did good," she said, sitting beside him. "Real good. Look at her." She gestured to Emma, who was surrounded by friends, her face bright with happiness. "That's a child who knows she's loved, who knows her worth. You gave her that, Marcus." "I had a lot of help." "You did. But you also did the hardest part. You showed up every single day, even when it would have been easier to give up. Even when the world told you that you couldn't do this. You proved them wrong." Marcus watched his daughter, seeing in her everything he'd hoped for and more. She was kind and confident and brave. She stood up for kids who were bullied. She asked questions and read voraciously and created art that covered their apartment walls. She was, in every way that mattered, exactly who she was supposed to be. "You know what I figured out?" Marcus said. "When Emma was in the hospital and asked if God forgot about us, I didn't have a good answer. But I do now." "What's that?" "God doesn't forget anyone, but sometimes we forget to see how he's working. Through people who show up, through kindness from strangers, through communities that decide to care." Every person who helped us, who saw us, who reminded us we mattered, that was God. Right there. Present the whole time. Catherine smiled, her eyes bright with tears. Daniel would have liked you, and Emma would have liked him. I think so too. As the party wound down and parents came to collect their children, several stopped to talk to Marcus, to thank him for hosting, to tell him how much their kids enjoyed playing with Emma, to invite them to playdates and birthday parties and casual weekend hangouts. One mother, a woman named Teresa, whose daughter Mia was in Emma's class, pulled him aside. "I need to apologize to you," she said quietly. "For what?" "Last year, when the girls wanted to have a playdate, I made excuses. I didn't want Mia going to your apartment because—" She trailed off, looking ashamed. "Because I'd heard you were a single dad, and I made assumptions. Unfair ones. About whether you could adequately supervise, whether your home would be appropriate, whether a dwarf could be a good parent," Marcus finished, his voice neutral. "Yes, and I'm so sorry. I've watched you this year, seen how devoted you are to Emma, how the other kids adore you, how you show up to every school event even though I know you work long hours. You're a better parent than most of the two-parent families I know. I was wrong to judge you, and I wanted to say that. To really say it." Marcus looked at this woman who'd excluded his daughter based on his difference, and he felt anger and forgiveness warring inside him. The anger was justified. People like Teresa made his life harder, made Emma's life harder, kept them on the outside of normalcy. But forgiveness was stronger, because Teresa had done what most people never did, recognized her prejudice and apologized for it. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally, "and for giving Mia and Emma a chance to be friends despite your reservations. They're good together, and you're welcome at our house any time, really." After everyone left, Marcus and Emma cleaned up the pavilion together, stuffing paper plates and streamers into trash bags, taking down decorations. "Best birthday ever," Emma declared. "Even better than when I was 6. Marcus remembered that birthday, the discount cake, the small apartment, the fear that he couldn't give her enough. How far they'd come since then. How much had changed. "I'm glad, baby. You deserved a great party. Will you promise me something, Daddy?" "Depends on what it is. Promise that no matter how old I get, we'll always remember today. How happy we were. How we had people who loved us." She looked at him with those serious eyes that were so much older than 8. "Promise we'll remember that we're not forgotten?" Marcus felt his heart crack and heal simultaneously. "I promise. We'll always remember. And we'll always know that being different made us part of a different kind of family. The kind you choose, the kind that chooses you back." Emma hugged him tight, and Marcus held his daughter and thought about the question she'd asked years ago. Did God forget about us, Mommy? No, he thought. God never forgot. We just had to learn how to see him in the people who showed up, in the kindness of strangers who became friends, in the stubborn refusal to give up even when giving up seemed easier. As they drove home in the now reliable Civic, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted and happy. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror and felt a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. This was enough. This was everything. This small, fierce, beautiful life they'd built from nothing but love and determination and the help of people who decided they mattered. The radio played softly, and Marcus drove through Riverside, past the places that had witnessed their struggle and their growth, past the hospital where Emma had almost died and where Dr. Morrison had first appeared, past the community center where he'd found connection with other parents, past Mrs. Chen's building, where light glowed warm in windows, past Catherine's house, where more books waited for Emma to devour, past all these markers of a life not forgotten but remembered, witnessed and celebrated by a community that had decided love was stronger than difference. Marcus Webb pulled into the parking lot of their apartment building, carried his sleeping daughter upstairs, tucked her into their shared bed, and then stood at the window looking out at the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did, but tonight he had this. Proof that they'd made it through the hardest parts. Proof that asking for help wasn't weakness but wisdom. Proof that being a good father had nothing to do with height or money or fitting into the world's narrow definitions of normal. We weren't forgotten, he whispered into the darkness. We never were. And somewhere in the spaces between buildings and breaths and beating hearts, the universe whispered back, I know. I've been here all along. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. What city, what country, what corner of the world brought you here today? Tell me what moment moved you most, what part made you stop and think about the families in your own life who are fighting battles you might not see. Was it Marcus carrying Emma to the hospital? Was it the moment Emma asked if God forgot about them? Was it the community that formed around them, proving that love is stronger than circumstance? Your words matter so much. They really do. They remind me why stories like this need to be told, why we need to keep sharing experiences that open our eyes and soften our hearts. Every comment, every share, every moment you take to connect with this story helps it reach someone else who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling and needs to know they're not alone. Someone who's different and needs to know that different doesn't mean less. Someone who's trying their best and needs to know that their best is enough. And if you felt something real while watching this, if Marcus and Emma's journey reminded you of your own struggles or inspired you to see the world differently, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. It helps these stories reach people who need to be reminded that they're not forgotten, that love is always enough, that showing up day after day is the truest form of heroism. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for seeing Marcus and Emma and recognizing that every family, no matter how different, no matter how much they struggle, deserves to be celebrated. You're part of this story now too, part of the community that decides to remember instead of forget. And that matters more than you might realize. Until the next story, keep loving the people in your life who need it most. Keep showing up. Keep remembering. And know that wherever you are in your own journey, you're not forgotten either. We see you. We're here with you. And we're all in this together.